Welcome, everybody. My name is Jesse Dominic, and I'm very pleased to have as a guest today to be speaking with Proto-Presbyter Father Peter Heers. Many of you may know him already. Father is the founder, the president of Uncut Mountain Press. You publish lots of high-quality traditional Orthodox Christian books, and you also run the Orthodox Ethos website. And you've been doing weekly question and answer sessions and lectures, I guess. And right now, you're going through the book of Revelation, right? Based on commentary from the Elder Ephraim of
Yes, we're about halfway through, we've been going for a year and a half. We're still halfway through, but glory to God, it's an amazing series of commentary.
Yeah, I think he's one of the most, just one of the deepest probably commentators, certainly of the recent times.
Yes,
that we have on Scripture.
Amen.
So
it's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
You're welcome, Father. It's great to see you again. Of course, I've known Father Peter for about 15 years or so. When I was in seminary, Father Peter put together a program for English-speaking seminarians. We came to his village in Greece. Father invited lots of speakers from the Thessaloniki University, from local monasteries, and we also went to Mount Athos. And that brings us to the topic of today's interview. Recently, on March 30th, there was the news that Elder Ephraim of St. Skete reposed in the Lord. And I remembered that on our trip, Father, you took us to St. Andrew's, and I know that you weren't a spiritual child of Elder Ephraim, but I know that you are well connected, on Mount Athos in the Greek Orthodox world. So I thought that it would be nice if you could just together we could have an introduction to Elder Ephraim of St. Andrew's Skete. Sorry, because I think there's not that much information about him in the English-speaking world, Orthodox English-speaking world.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, he's very well known in the Greek Orthodox world. He's very prolific, as we'll talk about tonight, and he was a very well-known spiritual son of Elder Ephraim. But I think today we'll do our best to do an introduction, and hopefully in the future we'll see a lot more material coming into English. He's from his many lectures, so we'll do our best.
All right, Father. I know you have some pictures and maybe a video you'd like to show us first of all.
So just because maybe some people watching haven't even seen the elder. This is not a famous, but a well-known picture. I think it really does kind of capture the elder in many ways, how I remember him. Mm-hmm. And he was often standing in this way with his hand, it seemed like he was constantly in days he's in supplication to the Lord and constantly praying. And so this is a characteristic picture of him. I also had this picture, which is also well known. And there he is standing with his hand like he would do when he was in church and was praying. And then we had the opportunity, it was very blessed that when he came to America, he came to Jordanville when I was teaching at Jordanville. And you can see here, he's on my left, and to his left is Father Cyprian, a higher monk in the monastery. In the background is the Catholicon of the monastery. And on my right are fathers from the monastery. Father Palamas is one of the chanters. And we had an opportunity there with then Father Luke to chat. And now Bishop Luke's, he showed us the video of the uncovering of the relics of Bishop Constantine, and here's a picture of the elder with a picture of the incorrupt relics of that blessed bishop who was we were talking about during our visit with Elder Ephraim. So that's a little bit in terms of just photographic material on Elder Ephraim, and then we have a little video before we start going to his life. This is just taken a few days ago when they were doing the burial, and they were saying the Jesus prayer. Well, in Mount Athos, in the Athonite tradition of Philothea and other monasteries, they would say the Jesus prayer. And if you watch the whole video, they say the Jesus prayer. But here they're singing Eternal Memory. So that's just a little clip from a longer video, but you can see the turnout, very unique on Mount Athos for the repose of any monk to see so many people. It was quite a large turnout, and a lot of spiritual children who were priests. You saw many priests there with praying. So it just kind of a witness to his the reach of his spiritual fatherhood, and one of, I think, the contemporary Athonites who did a lot of missionary-oriented work. In other words, confession outside of Athos, lots of spiritual children. I think he had some monastic communities that he confessed, women's monastic communities. And then he had also many lectures that he gave, or many homilies. Now, many of them were in Mount Athos, recorded and then shared, but there were also times when he would go off of Mount Athos. So, he was well known as the disciple of Elder Ephraim. He was one of the abbots that followed Elder Ephraim's departure in the early 90s when he left for America. And then he eventually, by God's providence, according to Elder Ephraim, became the Dikeos, or the head of the Skete of St. Andrew's Skete, which had fallen into disrepair after many years of being empty because of the situation in Russia. It was a Russian Skete. So they repopulated that in the late 90s, I think. So there's a lot to talk about, but just that's a few things, and then we can ask me other things, and we'll go deeper in different ways.
Sure. Well, yeah, thank you for showing us that video. As we've said, it showed that he really was a very beloved elder. But that brings me to my first question. So, and as I've said, it doesn't seem like he's that well known in the English speaking world. So maybe for people who aren't familiar with him, or even just with the idea of eldership, why does this matter? What is the role of an elder? Why should, an American Orthodox convert, why should I be particularly concerned that a Greek elder on a mountain in Greece has reposed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, if we're familiar with the lives of the saints, we're familiar with the Synaxarion, we're going to see that it's filled with, of course, monastics, and then it's filled with spiritual fathers, elders, who were abbots many times of monasteries, but also spiritual fathers of untold, numbers of spiritual children. So it's really at the core, at the center of the church. The fact that we might not be so familiar with this reality has to do more with our circumstances, maybe in the various missionary lands that the Orthodoxy has been taken to in the 20th century. But if you grow up, as an Orthodox Christian in Greece, of course, you're going to be spending a lot of time in Mount Athos, or at least trying to get there if you're serious and pious, and you're a man and you want to go to the monasteries. And Athos is the center, spiritually speaking, of the church. And therefore, the elders, who are the spiritual guides, and these are men who are essentially chosen by God through the brotherhood or their own elder to be spiritual guides. In other words, they had made much progress, and that's why they're in the position of eldership for the most part. I mean, that's the case certainly in the larger monasteries. That's the role of spiritual guidance and also teaching and guiding the monastic brotherhood through the various temptations. So Elder Ephraim had not only the acclaim, the blessing, and the endorsement, let's say, of Elder Ephraim, one of our great 21st century holy elders, I think recognized universally as a holy man, and I would not be surprised if he's quickly glorified officially as a saint. But so the fact that he was chosen to succeed him in the monastery of Philotheo is, of course, a tremendous endorsement. But he had the embrace of so many spiritual children. I'm not sure how many spiritual children he had. I wouldn't know the number, but they seemed very extensive, and many people would find rest under his epitrachilion. he was a part, just to give you a little insight, he was a part of, I think, what we might want to call a part of the monastic rejuvenation and regeneration of Athos in the 1970s. And I found a picture years ago that is very, I think, indicative of his place and also what was happening in the 70s. You know, Athos, as you may know, in the 50s and 60s, people were talking about the demise of Athos, that it was over. Like, this is just a lot of old men, and they had a lot of monasteries that had turned into idiorythic monasteries, which are not really traditional monastic ways of life. So you had in the Kilya, you had great ascetics like St. Joseph the Hesychist, but the major monasteries were, it was hit and miss what kind of monastic life you found there. So there was this speculation, well, you know, 1,000 years and the end of Athos is at the door. Well, God, of course, had quite different plans for Athos and for Orthodoxy. And almost immediately in the 60s, you began to see one by one the repopulation of all the monastic brotherhoods. And of course, at the center of that was Elder Ephraim and the spiritual children of St. Joseph the Hesychist. Mm-hmm. And so in the 70s, you had large numbers of young men meeting people, you know, elders like Elder Ephraim, and in the middle of their theological schooling, like Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews, who we're talking about today, they departed from Mount Athos. I think this was true of other abbots and spiritual children of Elder Ephraim. They were so taken by and just inspired by the monastic life and the brotherhood of Elder Ephraim and other elders that they left everything behind and departed. So he didn't. Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews did not finish his third year of theological school, and departed and joined the brotherhood in the 70s. Before he did that, as I said, I found this picture, which was very interesting, because in the picture you see future abbots and spiritual fathers of Mount Athos all together at the Metoki of St. Paul's Monastery. And of course, this was then in the mid-70s, so there was a new abbot there by the name of Parthenios. Now, Elder Parthenios is very well known all around the Greek Orthodox world as one of the revered elders of contemporary Athos. He's been, I think, an abbot almost 50 years, 40-something years of St. Paul's. And at that time, he was a new abbot, and there's a picture there of Elder Parthenios, and then you can spot, as a layman, Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews and Elder Joseph of Xeropotamo, the future abbot of Xeropotamo, also a spiritual son of Elder Ephraim. And I think there's a few other fathers that were notable and became monastics. And so they were running to people like Parthenios and elders like Parthenios, who St. Paisios famously referred to him as, well, there are many abbots on Athos, but there's only one Parthenios. Wow. So he had the endorsement of a great saint of our day.
Yeah.
And he is an exceptional figure of Mount Athos today. And I think he's in his 90s today. So they were there in the Metoki there, and you could see that there was this, groundswell of young men leaving for Athos, and Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews was one of them. So any case, the question of eldership is really basic. At the center of the church has been from the beginning. And if you're at all familiar with the, Philokalia or the movement of the regeneration of the church in the late 18th and early 19th century on Mount Athos in Moldavia with St. Paisios Veleskovsky, or in Russia with the Optina Fathers, at the center of that, of course, is the place of the starets, or the elder. And so this is just the case to this day on Mount Athos. And Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews is one of the latest representatives of this revered spiritual institution of eldership.
Mm-hmm. And so if he went to Mount Athos then in the 70s, so I guess he would have been, directly under Elder Ephraim of Arizona, at least a decade, maybe 15 years or so before Elder Ephraim came to America then?
I would say probably around 15 years. I'm not sure exact date he went, but probably around 77 maybe is what I'm guessing. So that gives about 15 years before Elder Ephraim more or less departs for in 90. I want to say around the early 90s, 92, he retired as abbot. He was still coming back and forth to to Mount Athos up until about 2001, I think it was the last time he came. So yeah, and they would go. I mean, there's pictures of Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews going to Elder Ephraim, and
So he remained his spiritual child, of course.
Yes, of course, and he spoke about him all the time, and that's characteristic of an authentic elder, is they're constantly referring to their own elder and really, speaking about their grace and their teaching and their example to their spiritual children. Elder Ephraim did that with St. Joseph incessantly. Yeah.
I'm currently, during Lent, I'm rereading my Elder Joseph the Hesychast by Elder Ephraim. It's beautiful. It's beautiful how he speaks about him.
It is. It's wonderful. And that's really instructive for us, because if we have to be disciples of the contemporary saints and elders and the contemporary apostles, it's really essential we're connected to what God has given us in our generation. Otherwise, it's really problematic and a question whether we can be connected to the saints before then. I think it goes through this generation back. That's how I see it, and I think it's really key. So these are what God has given us. The great brotherhood of Elder Joseph the Hesychast is one of the great contemporaries. It'd be something like if we were in the days of, I don't know, Saint Simeon the theologian, or Saint Theodore the Studite, or Saint Gregory Palamas. There's a cluster in every generation of holy men that kind of, when you read the Synaxarion, you realize they kind of all were connected. Like today's on the new calendar is the feast of Saint Gregory of Sinai, and it's not clear exactly, but a lot of people think he was the spiritual father of Saint Gregory Palamas, and there's some historical details that point to that. And so there's these clusters of saints in every generation. Of course, Saint Joseph Hesychast, now officially glorified, and his disciples are one of the great examples. Something like Optina Fathers in the late 19th century.
And again, it's like when you read, for instance, how Elder Ephraim of Arizona, for instance, how he speaks of Saint Joseph, you can sense that not only is he praising his elder, but he understands how great his elder was, because he himself received the grace and the gifts of his elder, at least to a certain degree. You can sense that in the way they speak. So I'm assuming when this Elder Ephraim of St. Andrew's, Skete, he would so highly praise his elder because he also received, gifts from him.
Yes.
I'm assuming if he became such a great Athonite elder himself, it means he tasted of the gifts of his spiritual father, I would.
Yeah, and I think we could talk a little bit about that. Of course, again, I'm not one of his spiritual children, but I have contact with some of his spiritual children. I've listened to one or two of them speak in the last few days, and I can relay what I heard in Greek from their mouths. And these are people who lived as under their spiritual guidance. And so, again, I'm not personally vouching for it, but I'll let you know what they're saying. And I think that there's, a lot of reason to believe that this Elder Ephraim was a very grace-filled elder. His spiritual children have experience of him having the gift of clairvoyance, of knowing things that obviously were not possibly known otherwise, but by the grace of God, and being very ascetic, living very ascetically. He's said to have not washed since his tonsure, or early days of monastic life. He's said to have not slept, at least for long stretches of time. I'm not sure how we know exactly the details, but there's a lot of witnesses that say that he did not sleep in a bed, but would spend long stretches of the evening praying and sleeping, here and there. And so he was a man of great prayer and ascetic struggle. I'm sure much more will come out over time, and eventually we'll learn, but that's the nature of these things. People don't talk about these things during one's life. It's not really not done much, at least not in the immediate spiritual children. So there's a lot of signs, but he's also extremely prolific. I want to share with you just how extensive his missionary reach is in terms of his homilies and teachings. So here is a page on the internet that has his homilies, And here you can see that they're extremely extensive. We're talking about almost 350 or 355 homilies just on this webpage here over the years. I think a lot of these were done probably at the Skete when he had a lot of pilgrims came and he would give talks, but they're covering all kinds of topics from monastic life to the fall of Constantinople to temptations, prayer, all kinds of pastoral issues, how to fight the thoughts. I'm just seeing a few things here, but St. Constantine the Great, I mean, they're very extensive. It's not like you're talking about somebody simply talking about strictly the monastic life. He was gifted with a very powerful intellect. And there's another page here that's also, I can show you. This is a well-known web page, Enomeni Romeosini, it's called. And they have a page dedicated to Elder Ephraim of St. Andrew, Skete. And so you have here, many homilies, again, on really important topics for Christians. Internal peace, the fast, noetic prayer, the feast of the meeting of the Lord, stories from the Girondicona, the proud monk and the devil, the Orthodox is persecuted. We'll talk a little bit about his confession of faith and with regard to ecumenism. It's very important, I think, to mention that. But many topics dealing with confession, judgmentalness, Athonite life, Saint Anthony the Great, the Holy Cross, and then there was a famous 5-hour interview he did on a radio station, which you can find on YouTube. So very extensive, and of course, especially in the area that I lived, I was in Thessaloniki the entire time I was in Greece, I was outside Thessaloniki, and so he was very well known in northern Greece, and he would come to Thessaloniki and have many spiritual children. So yeah, I think I want to say a word or two about his involvement in the struggle against the various heresies of our day, because I think that's very important, because there's so much confusion today. There's so much. People are looking for spiritual guidance, and I think you have to first and foremost establish that your spiritual father, your spiritual guide, is orthodox, right? He's confessing the faith. He's very clear. He's got discernment of spirits. He's got discernment of the boundaries. He's following the Holy Fathers. All these things that are clearly apparent in the life of Elder Ephraim of St. Andrew Skete. He was one of the signers of the Confession of Faith Against Ecumenism in 2008, which we worked on with a number of other fathers, and he was very stridently against the documents that were signed in Crete, especially the one concerning the heterodox. He has a document online where he says, we love all people, we love all the heterodox, but there's no way we can ever accept a heresy and delusion as the body of Christ, and we can never speak of heterodox confessions as churches. And so he gives a long apology for the rejection of those documents in Crete. And so very much, expected from an Athonite, but important that he did not remain silent, and he does not remain silent. On the other hand, he also speaks about the temptation on the right. And he says that, there's undiscerning zealots on the right who did not understand the proper way of responding and rejecting heresy. And they end up methodologically, they're in error, and they end up far from the patristic path. And he's critical of that as well. So I think this is very much the characteristic of a holy elder, is that they're very discerning. They're walking that tightrope of orthodoxy, not falling into confessing the faith, and yet not losing sight of what, all of that is meant to lead people into a deeper relationship with Christ. That's got to be the core of everything. And so he was, I think it'll become apparent. I'm sure there'll be things translated and published eventually, but you'll see just how deep and broad he was in terms of the topics and the matters that he handled for the sake of the faithful, for the sake of the church. extreme love for the Church of Christ comes across in his homilies and in his witness.
Well, I think it's important that you said how he spoke about how, yes, we love everybody, but we have to defend the faith, because, you know, there can be this idea that being strict, having boundaries and saying, no, you're actually outside the church, that, oh, you're not loving. But I feel like the strictness and the loving, that they often will always go together in the saints.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at just, he's a spiritual father, he's a father. Elder Ephraim and all the elders are fathers, and they have children. And just like a father who never disciplines his child, a father who never says what's right and wrong to his children, a father who never says, these are the boundaries, don't go beyond them, and guide them on the narrow path. I mean, he's not a loving father. That's not love. That's self-love. That's worldliness, whatever. But so it's expected from every true spiritual father, true representative of Christ, that he's going to provide that clear guidance and keep people on the narrow path. And that's to be expected. And that is true love, right? That's true love, because you want people to come to Christ. So if you were to disregard these things because, well, they're hard to hear or people don't like to hear them, then you're putting something else above that love of Christ and desire for salvation. And it would not be an authentic hieroda starets of the church to do that. So I think it's very important that we recognize that if you don't see that, then there's a problem. There's a problem. Yeah. But we do see that in Elder Ephraim very clearly. Yeah.
Well, I think in warning about both the errors on the left and the right, of course, that emphasis has a commonality, of course, with our own Father Seraphim Rose. And just this whole idea of walking the royal path, I think is so important for us today. It's very easy, I think, especially, with the internet, anybody can find anything. There's the true Orthodox, there's the ultra liberal. I know Father Seraphim, for instance, he helped me to kind of get past the temptation of the true church, is the ultra super correct. So it's very good to know that we have another elder out there who's really emphasizing this and this royal path.
Yes, and that's the one of the reasons why I really need to have his and other works like this, Elder Gabriel and others on Athos, translated into English to help a lot of people. I get people just this morning. I had somebody write him and say, "Well, what's the problem? Why can't I do this? Go there." And you're struggling. They're in this American wasteland, right? And they're, spiritually speaking, and they see the true Orthodox, quote unquote, and they're saying, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to go there." And they have no clue of the whole history, context. They don't have the Elder Ephraim of, the example of Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews before them, and all the Athonites and all. They haven't learned all this, and it's so easy to fall into that trap. So it's really urgent that both the delusion and error of ecumenism, the pan-heresy of ecumenism, be pointed out very strongly, and that the way we resist that and the way that we follow the fathers and don't fall into that error is not to go to the other extreme, or not to fall into this idea that, well, I have to depart from everybody. I have to cut myself off from all these people, all the Orthodox, to be Orthodox. No, you don't cut yourself off from other Orthodox to be Orthodox. And before a council, we don't have any fear. The fact, just real quick to help people out there who might be going through this problem. Are there saints in the church? Do we recognize St. Paisios as a saint? Do we recognize St. Porphyrios, St. Jacobos, St. Venios, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? St. Gabriel of Georgia, do we recognize Elder Ephraim as a saint, as a holy man? Well, then you can be too. And that means the grace of God has not abandoned us, and therefore you don't have to depart from the body of Christ, which is producing saints and holy men, unless you think they're all charlatans. But then if you think they're all charlatans, God help us. I mean, I guess then we have to flee to the mountains, and there's nothing left. It's all a fake. But that's clearly not the case in the lives of these great saints and elders of our day. And so therefore, there must be a way to resist the temptation on the left, the heresy of ecumenism, without going to the temptation on the right, without having to depart from all those contemporary elders. Essentially, you're departing from the elders when you go and follow a path they didn't do. They didn't follow that path. So that would be an error to do that.
Well, of course, even St. Joseph the Hesychast, he for a time was with some of the old calendarists, but he moderated his stance even, and then he actually had a revelation from God that, if I remember correctly, God revealed to him, you have to stay with the quote unquote established church, I suppose.
And his own brotherhood was shocked. They were shocked, and he said, "You can leave me if you want." He was very strict. Said, "No, that's it," and he laid his foot down. And he was initially, I think, if I remember correctly, he was initially responding to some changes in the synod of Chrysostom of Florina, who was the head of the old calendarists, the Floridanites, not the Matthewites, the two groups. And he was resisting. I think, if I remember correctly, he was responding to changes in their ecclesiology, basically considering the Church of Greece's mysteries as graceless or something along that line. And so he said, "This can't be right." And he was provoked to go and pray, because that's what he did always. He always sought prayer and God's divine enlightenment for anything he did. And then he had this vision that you're talking about, where he's found off on this little rock off of Mount Athos, about to be drowned by the waves of the sea. And then all of a sudden he jumps and he reaches Athos again. And so he understood that this was a major departure and error on the part of those in the old calendarist jurisdictions. And then that's when he decided, no, we need to be under the patriarchate. Now, I'm sure there's much more to the story, and I know people are going to say, no, you got it wrong. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that he, by God's prayer and revelation, he brought his whole brotherhood back into communion, in spite of obviously things that they saw wrong. Right? This is what people don't get. Obviously, we all understand the great temptation, error, and distortion represented by the various ecumenists and those who are clearly departing from the narrow path. That doesn't mean the church has been lost. It's like people who come to the church, they meet a priest, they're scandalized by the priest, and then they leave the church. And you're like, well, why did you leave the Christ? Because of one of the sinners in the hospital. I thought you were here for the physician. We came for the physician. And you go to a hospital and say, "You all sick people, you make me sick. I'm leaving." That wouldn't make any sense, right? It's either a hospital or it's not. Okay, you don't believe it's a hospital anymore because there are sick people? That doesn't make any sense. So it's the same thing here. Before the church, the infallible voice of the church comes in council and delineates the boundaries clearly with this new found heresy, this new theory of the body of Christ. There's a great gray area and a struggle always throughout church history. I mean, what do you do with Saint Meletius of Antioch or Saint Cyril of Jerusalem or Saint Ambrose of Milan? All of them were more or less elected in part by Arians after the First Ecumenical Council. There's a lot of gray area in church history. It's not so clear cut like people want to present. And there's a great struggle that happens with lots of pain and suffering and patience. And so, that's why we need these contemporary elders like Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews, who was well known. I would say he was an Athonite's Athonite, if that makes any sense. In other words, if you go to the Kelia and other places on Athos, they all loved Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews Skete because he was on that royal path, but he was confessing the faith, and he was not at all open and plain with the matters of faith. And the Athonites especially in the Kiryat, they love that, and they're looking for that. And so we need those kind of examples in a big way. So thank God for his faithfulness until the end. We should talk a little bit about how he ended his life. I think it's extremely instructive.
Yeah, for sure. Let me pull that up. I did want to read that because about a month or so before he reposed, so he reposed, as we said, March 30th. At some point in February, he kind of made an announcement that he was suffering from cancer. And what he says is very, very instructive for us, very edifying if we know how to take it. So he said, "And behold, our good Christ gave me 3 priceless gifts out of infinite divine love. First divine gift, My pancreas is full of cancer. Second divine gift, my lungs are full of cancer, hence the terrible cough, a lot of hemoptysis and shortness of breath. Third divine gift, my spine is full of cancer, hence the severe pains and insomnia. So he had his pancreas, his lungs, and his spine are full of cancer. This must have been terribly painful. And yet he's saying these are precious divine gifts. I mean, how can we reflect upon this for someone perhaps who isn't familiar with the ascetic tradition of the church, the role of suffering? This could be very strange, or even for us who theoretically we know it but haven't experienced it ourselves.
I think we have to remember always that first and foremost that death is not the worst thing. And that's what people, I think, lose sight of. They're fearful of the body, the separation of the soul from the body, because they're ignorant of what is to come. But if you already live in the kingdom, if you already experience the reality and you're in communion with the reality of Jesus Christ and the eternal life, then death is a doorway, and your fear of death is no longer. That's exactly why he came. And it's commemorated by the Apostle Paul that he came to do away with the fear of death, which is one of the basic causes of sin, is that people are fleeing from this eventuality and trying to console themselves with the created order instead of the uncreated order, who is God. So death is not the worst thing. The worst thing is separation from God. And so death is a part of this life. It's the quintessential moment of this life, which shows forth what we understood and how we live this life. And so then the second thing we have to remember is that everything happens in and under the providence of God. Nothing's an accident. And therefore, for someone who understands and lives the providence of God and sees that his hand throughout their life, they would not sit and question the arrival of a sickness like cancer, but they would see it again as the love of God. And if you're desiring to depart, like St. Paul says, to live is Christ, but to die is gain. If you're desiring to depart from this life, then you're going to look at the eventuality, the coming of death, as a beautiful moment that you've been waiting for and expecting. And the monastics on Athos, if nothing else, I would think that most of them are struggling to cultivate the remembrance of death, not the fear of death, the remembrance of death. And so the fact that it's now at the door is no surprise. It's like, we're not shocked here. We expected this moment. We've been waiting for it all our life. And then the fact that he's given the opportunity to suffer, clearly I would say that he would struggle, if not, gladly see it as an opportunity for further purification, further identification with the suffering of Christ, that this is his cross and that it's salvific. And so glory be to God that I've been made worthy of this. Just like a martyr would feel the same with the arrival of the time of martyrdom. He's not, by God's grace, he's not going to flee it. He's going to rejoice, as you see in the lives of many of the saints. They would rejoice at the moment of martyrdom, and they would welcome it, and they would actually say sometimes they would say to their persecutors, "Do what you need to do, so I can depart here and be with my Lord." So all of this and much more, I think, is behind the words of the elder. And it's a very good sign, I think, that and I think he's also trying to teach his people. This is not necessary for him to say. He doesn't need to verbalize this. Why is he doing that? Because he wants to teach his spiritual children, this is how we're going to encounter these things if we want them to be profitable for us spiritually. But I think he truly did, embrace it, as he says. It wasn't just words. He really did embrace this as a gift of God and an opportunity to go deeper and be closer to Christ and to be, spiritually benefited by the trial. So yeah, a few words, but you could probably see a lot more. It's pretty deep what we're witnessing.
Yeah, what you said reminded me of. I remember learning in seminary. I believe it was St. Andrew of Crete, in one of his homilies on the Dormition, says something about how the saints, even we could say, they voluntarily die because Christ had gone into the grave. So they die in order to follow Christ. they more fully experience the mystery of Christ by dying, because death is where the grave is, somewhere that Christ was, but they come out the other side, or they will, with him.
Even death before the resurrection was a benefit to humanity, because it put an end to the fall. Now, now the end of the fall is not the end of our life, but it's just the doorway to the resurrection. So he's now, of course, freed us from that eventuality. But so in everything, God is a benefactor of man. Nothing's an accident. Everything is done for our salvation. And so that's the reality. I mean, if they're holy men in the church, they're living the reality of the death and resurrection of Christ every day. It's not something that they encounter for the first time at the end of their life.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Well, I do want to jump back and fill in just maybe one or two biographical details. So as we said, he was a spiritual child of Elder Ephraim, who eventually moved to America at Philotheo. And then at some point, the Elder Ephraim that we're speaking about, he also became abbot of Philotheo. Philotheo is one of the 20 ruling monasteries, as they call them, on the Holy Mountain.
Yes.
And do you know when he became abbot? It was the early.
I think there was an abbot before him, and for whatever reason, he had to retire, and then he came on, and I think it would have been in mid-90s, is all I want to say. I don't know the exact date. And then he was abbot into the early 2000s, if I'm not mistaken. So about, I don't know, anywhere from 6 to 8 years, maybe. And there was a little bit of controversy back in that day. Why did he depart? As everywhere, there's human disagreements and passions, and everywhere we have differences of opinions and things like that. But it was all, and this is a good lesson for all of us. God allowed that so that, according to Elder Ephraim, who commented on this later, that the Skete of St. Andrews would be repopulated with the brotherhood. And it was God's will that happened. So sometimes things happen and we're like, why is this happening? Why are we suffering? Or why are we, why do we have this eventuality? We're being forced to do X, Y, Z. And we have to always remember, again, that it's all in the providence of God. And there's something for those who love Christ, as St. Paul says, it's all going to work for good at the end of the day. So the good news was that although, a number of fathers left Philothea and went to St. Andrews, it brought about the repopulation and the rebuilding of this massive Skete of St. Andrew's Skete, which is a part of the Vatopedi Monastery. It was built in the 1900s or the 1800s by Russian monks, and it was quite large. I don't remember the number, but I mean, maybe 800 monks it's at one point. So you can imagine now a brotherhood of like 30 monks or maybe 50. I don't know what their number is now, but it's not that large. Is in this massive structure that could have held hundreds and hundreds of monks. They probably had monks outside of the Skete as well, but in Kelia. But so you're talking about real, and then this had fallen in total disrepair and had become dilapidated because the monks weren't coming from Russia for 60 years, 70 years. So there was just a tremendous amount of work to be done. And so all of this came about without, there wasn't like Elder Ephraim didn't say, I need to go do that. It was clearly after God bringing things about. And then they're saying, well, we're going to leave. Where are we going to go? And this was offered and it was blessed. And it wasn't
self-willed then. It wasn't like.
Right. Exactly. They had no intention to depart, but it was God's will that they did. And, it's a massive undertaking. They've done a lot of work, a lot of work on the churches. I remember going there in the 90s, and there was a number of churches that were off limits because they were unusable. And then I would go back in the late 2000s, and we stayed with you in 2012, I think, or 13. And I think it was ready then when we went with you, but it certainly is since then. Massive church on the third floor over the back end of the monastery. The Russians built a lot of churches, and they were very large because they were large brotherhoods. So this church is massive. And so it took a long time. It's totally rebuilt, totally redone, beautiful icons, beautiful, all new, Stasidia, everything from scratch, basically. And they've done that there. And I think they did that to St. Anthony's. They have a chapel at St. Anthony, the Great. That whole building in the middle of the Skete has been rebuilt.
Mm.
Another church over where the fathers lived has been rebuilt. They use that in the winter. And then there's the, of course, massive church. At one time, the largest church in the Balkans, probably the largest church on Athos. From what I think it's the largest church on Athos, St. Andrew.
I think so.
Dedicated St. Andrew. That's all been, rejuvenated and rebuilt. And yeah, it's a unique brotherhood. They've got a lot of different people from different places. Elder Ephraim of St. Andrew, Skete, he did a lot of missionary work. He's well known in Finland, for instance. And they were. I think there's a spiritual son who became a monk from Finland, if I'm not mistaken. There's from England. We have Father Philotheos, who was from Oxford. He's a higher monk there, and they're very. The brotherhood is really a beautiful brotherhood, and they're very down to earth. Very down to earth, very salt of the earth people and fathers, and that's like their elder. Their elder was this way.
And I do remember. I wanted to say, it's, as we've said, the Skete was founded by Russians, but now it's repopulated by Greeks. So it's a very interesting experience being there. You're in a very clearly Russian-style church, and yet you're listening to, very beautiful Byzantine chant, even Byzantine liturgics. And it's like on one level, it seems like it's a clash, but on a deeper level, it's Greek Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy, Romanian, Serbian, whatever. It's all Orthodoxy.
And that's the great not only the great thing of Orthodoxy, but it's the great thing of Athos. Athos is pan-Orthodox. And it's in the blood and the bones of Athos that this is a place for all of the Orthodox world. So you've got Russian monasteries, you've got, of course, Bulgarian, Zografu, the Serbian, Hilandar, you've got the Romanian Skete of St. John the Baptist.
John the Baptist, yeah.
And then you have, of course, people from all over the world. You've got, people from all over the different parts of the world that have become monks on Athos. 2,000 something monks, I think, today. And so it's so far from the ethnophilatism that has been a plague in certain parts of the church, and still, unfortunately, because of the political, use that the powerful of the world get out of that. That's why I think a lot of it continues. But at the core and the heart of the church, the monastics and the faithful, they're not. That's far from them, and that's how you feel when you're on Athos, and that's how you feel when you're at St. Andrew Skete. Very multi-ethnic, and like you said, it's combining a lot of different things, at once. And so it's great. It's a great witness to Orthodoxy. A lot of people who aren't Greeks or Russians, they come and they feel at home. Feel at home.
Right. Well, and so we've said you yourself weren't his spiritual child, but you did have an opportunity to, to speak with him. You served with him. He visited you at Jordanville. So you do have some. Do you have any impressions, perhaps, from serving liturgy with him?
So I did have the opportunity during the Feast of the Holy Cross at Xiropotamo many times, and then I visited him in the Skete, and we celebrated liturgy. It was a great blessing for me to be able to celebrate liturgy with him years ago. And I took the group that we were. I took many people there after that and spent time with him, and he was very generous. I remember once I was there for one of his talks, and he asked me to talk. He was very humble, like, here's this American, who am I? And then he'd ask me. So he's very, very, very humble, very approachable, and extremely prayerful. That's the impression I always had, that he was joyful. He always had a smile on his face and was ready to give you a good word. And he was very prayerful. And, you never got the sense that anger or judgmentalness was very far from him. You didn't feel that or see that. He was always trying to economize everybody, right? That's also the sense I got. I don't know much details, but from afar, that's what it seemed like me, economize in the sense of what? That like he would understand each one's needs and try to meet them. He wasn't this legalistic, demanding, authoritarian. I mean, it was very far from all of that. Was far from. He was a father, and he would apply things on a personal basis, one by one. Right. At the same time, he did not play. He wasn't the guru. He wasn't trying to be a guru, right? He wasn't trying to collect all kinds of people around him. and he would be, if need be, he would be strict. And one of his spiritual children did a video just yesterday and talked about how when it was necessary, he would be very strict with me, and you felt like, I've lost my, I've lost contact with my elder, because of what I'm doing. I need to get serious. You would wake up through that strictness. And then if you're doing well spiritually and things were going well, he would be filled with joy. Like, and this spiritual son said he knew when I called him up, and he would allow some spiritual children to call at 10 o'clock at night if they had some need, and he would answer the phone. And he said, when he answered the phone and I was doing well, he was extremely joyful. When I called him up for something that I had done wrong, or I had real trouble, I was whatever, and I had to have a heavy heart, and I needed to hear a strict word, then he would give me a strict word right away. So there's a lot of signs that he was very advanced in spiritual guidance and spiritual fatherhood. So yeah, my impression was always that this was a very deeply prayerful and spiritual and joyful spiritual father.
Again, I think that's a good example for us today, because I think there can often be the idea that to be pastoral is to be lenient, not apply, no epithemias, what's the word, penances. But that's not always what's needed. Being pastoral is to discern what's needed.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that a good bishop many years ago said to me. Talk about economy. And people usually think economy is only liberalizing things. He said, no, economy is any departure from the rule. So if the rule says, I don't know, X, and you increase it, that's economy. Yeah. So economy is not only one way. It could be two ways. And so economy is basically an application of the Spirit, but not exactly according to the letter. And that could be something that is a departure in both directions. And so in the same way, real pastoral care is going to see each circumstance a different response, analogous with the need. And we might, and oftentimes do, need to hear a strict word because we're going astray, or we're lax, or we're lazy. And if you just say don't worry about it, that doesn't help. It makes it worse.
Yeah.
It makes it worse.
Yeah. Well, Father, I think that was a pretty good introduction to this holy elder, and I think it gave us a good starting point to talk about some serious topics. Is there any last thoughts you'd have about Elder Ephraim, or about Mount Athos, about the spiritual life in general? Anything to leave us with?
I don't know. There's a lot you could say. I think one thing I would want to say is that I think Elder Ephraim of St. Andrews, if he was here, he would be talking about his own elder, and he would want to point everybody to his own elder, Elder Ephraim, and he would of course be extremely encouraging everybody to follow the examples of such great elders, Elder Ephraim, to frequent the monasteries. I'm trying to think what he would want to say if he was here. Sure. And to keep the faith. He would tell people, keep the faith in this. This is a tremendously, he was very concerned about the future. He spoke openly about the prophecies. He talked about all of this apocalyptic and eschatological questions. That was not far from him. He was very much cognizant of what the prophetic word of the church was, and he was talking to his spiritual children, preparing them for difficult days. He was very, alive and immediate. He was not somewhere off in the distance, distant from the people and the struggle of the church in the world. Not at all. So I think he would want to encourage and help everybody to be watchful, prayerful, and to go deeper and to get ready for difficult days and things like this is what one of the words he would say, as he did many times. Now, hopefully we'll have some translations of some of his more important lectures soon.
All right. Well, thank you again, Father Peter, very much for your time.
Thank you.
You're a very busy man. It's very, very, very glad to see you.
Good to see you, Jesse. I'm glad to hear everything's going well for you in Moscow. God help us. keep you safe, and God bring peace to the church there and to the church in Ukraine and everything. God help us. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Hope you have many more opportunities to help the faithful through your YouTube channel and your interviews. I look forward to seeing more of it.
God willing.
I mean,
Father, could you give us a blessing?
To the prayers of our holy fathers, to the prayers of our holy Elder Ephraim, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Thank you, Father.